don't get to know what questions you're going to throw at me. So let's just jump in, I guess. I will do my best.
That's
Let's go.
correct. We wanted to surprise you a bit, but yeah, let's get right into it. So first
Okay.
question, we're gonna pull it up on screen here. Okay, so question number one: I can't get anyone at my company to change what we're doing.
Okay. Technically not a question, but I assume somebody is trying to apply some of the lessons that we've done and gone over for the past 3 weeks or 4 weeks. There's 3 sessions. It was 4 weeks and 4 sessions in 5 weeks, right? Including this one. So yeah, so this is the challenge, right? No one, someone above you thinks that webinars are good for X but not for Y, or they think that, or you're trying to get like, someone on the technical side of the company to come on and is just sort of not into it. And so it's hard to know how to answer that question other than there are lessons to be pulled from, all of the replays that we've done. There are ways around it. I can tell you that the main reason these days in an enterprise software kind of situation or a SaaS situation, the main reason a marketing department, as opposed to a sales or department or your technical expert who's going to come on and do the presentation, the main reason marketing does them is they think of them as content marketing, right? It's a way to turn a cold lead into a warm lead. Or ideally, if they're really, what this person would be wanting to do is turn a warm lead into a weak prospect, because it's sales' job to figure out if they're a strong prospect. And in that case, you do them because they're so multi-purpose. Like you have a chance to run nurturing campaigns, telling people about the event and leading up to it. And then once the event's there and you've got that content, you get a transcript and you publish it as a blog post. You do the replay videos, you do warm-ups, you follow up with people after the fact. You create excerpts from it, from the chapters or whatever, like you can do on Contrast. You can reuse that content once it's created many different ways. And if you're trying to convince marketing to change what they're doing, marketing usually looks at these as a one and done kind of thing. And whoever didn't show up or didn't watch a replay is dead to them, right? Maybe we'll do another one next month or next quarter or next week. But really lean into we can slice it and dice it in so many ways. Once we have it, we can nurture people on the way into it. We can nurture people on the way out of it. And we can repurpose the content, turn it into text, turn it into shorts, do what we want, and extend its life and its facility way more than just the one and done approach that most people do today.
Yeah, I think there's so many ways to reuse your content outside of just the traditional lead gen. Like you said, video is kind of like text. You write it once, you use it multiple times. So same with video. You can cut up a little clip, put it on social media. Suddenly that becomes top of funnel. So yeah, great answer, Dean.
I don't have any. I'm going to make a recommendation. There are probably many companies that do this, services that do this. The first one I ever used was just a couple weeks ago called Missing Letter. You'll have to .com or whatever. You'll have to it's one of those companies that leaves off some of the letters in their name, and but I took, as an experiment, I took one of the replays that we did, threw it into Otter just to get like a transcript of it, and turned that into sort of a blog post. And then I pointed Missing Letter at it. It went through, pulled out a whole bunch of different quotes and snippets and stuff, turned it into a 4-week LinkedIn campaign, and post something from it every few days. And I don't have to do anything. It's just automatic. So the AI tools are becoming really good at spacing out and sort of breaking up and intuiting what's right or what's useful. Once you turn your video into text, or I guess technically you could turn text into video, and then repurposing it and turning it into basically advertising campaigns at no cost or very little cost. So awesome. Webinars and that kind of content, really useful, especially if you get a transcript.
That's a great hack, Dean. I'm gonna have to follow up with you after the session to pick your brain a little bit on the hack you did. Okay, but let's go on to the next question. So let's see if we can find number 2. Okay, question 2. I'm totally new to webinars. I'm scared to get started and make mistakes. What's your advice for a beginner?
Okay, so there are 2 ways to interpret that question. Either this is someone who's in the marketing department and they're new at sort of putting these things together and, basically, making a public facing a piece of content, or this is someone who's going to be the presenter. And in that case, yeah, it's no question. It can be very, very scary. So here's the thing about webinars, whichever way the question is intended, this fits. When you do a webinar, even like what we're doing right now, all mistakes are public. And really, what I tell clients for every event, every time, is that in a live event, something will go wrong. The best you can ever hope for is that most of the audience doesn't notice it, but something always goes wrong, right? We had one a few weeks ago where, for whatever reason, the session, it took us like a couple of minutes before we can actually start. I mean, this is like the whole point of live events, is that something can go wrong. It's one of the things that gives them sort of an energy and makes them a little bit I'm in an audience way more than I'm not in the audience, right? And so, like all of us, and there's always sort of a rubbernecking car wreck, train wreck kind of aspect to every live event, right? Something could go wrong and you could be there to see it. There's like this human nature. There's nothing wrong with it. It is what it is. And so so let's break down the question. One tip for each way. If you're in a marketing department and your concern is that something goes wrong and the company or the presenter, or by extension you, look foolish because of something that happened, maybe the presenter it turned out to be really like stiff and kind of dead on camera, maybe the technology didn't work, right? Maybe nothing came of it, right? It's not a lot of interest effort. The only way, unfortunately, to get better at live events is to either, to do live events. You can either do them with an audience or you can do them without an audience. That's called rehearsing. But the only way to get better at them is to just do them, unfortunately, right? 2 years ago, I almost never appeared on camera unless I was completely scripted. Now I'm fine talking for hours on camera with no script. But it took hundreds of events for me to get there. If the question is around, I'm the speaker and I'm afraid it's going to screw up, what I give to all the speakers is that 7-question structure that we talked about in the last one. Mm-hmm. And I say, all you have to do is reorganize your content along these 7 questions and just follow the format, right? Now, formulas, and really it's a template, it's a formula. Formulas are great. Formulaic is death. You never want to be formulaic. Audiences hate that. They tune right out, they're gone. But following that 7-step formula means that you're always doing something from a slightly different angle, so the audience is having a better experience instead of you just beating their attention to death with details. And it also means that you get to break up how you think about things, and you've got multiple opinions and a lot of knowledge about your topic. So just break it up into these little like chunks and answer these kinds of questions using the same information. It's easier for you. You're less likely to sort of freeze or be boring, and it's better for the audience.
Yeah. I think for me as well, someone who's done a lot less webinars than you, Dean, like you said, it's just practice. I think once you get in there and get a little bit comfortable, it becomes a lot easier. I think for me, taking your point of something's going to go wrong, just get over it. Once I really digested that and thought about it, like if you've ever attended a webinar and something's gone wrong, you never think about it afterwards. It's not something that you remember. You remember the content. If it was worthwhile, did you learn something?
Nobody remembers it started 30 seconds late.
Yep, exactly. So I think you just need to get over that hump, and then it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. I will make one point around that, though, and that is, if you remember, was it last week we did this, or 2 weeks ago? We talked about the don't hurt me, right? Which is something happens and the speaker starts apologizing to the other. So they're sorry because they started late, or there was a technical issue, or I don't speak in public very much and I'm really nervous, or don't blame me, I'm not in management, or I'm not in marketing, or I'm not one of those salespeople on the dark side kind of stuff. Like, don't do it. Don't hurt me. If something goes wrong, just plow forward. Do not stop and do it. Don't hurt me. Audiences do not feel comforted when their presenter somehow seems weaker or is not in control of their material or the experience. Just move forward. That's all you can do. Move forward.
Roll with the punches. Okay, great answer. Let's go to the next question. Let's pull it up here. So question 3, we're a new company. We don't have a large following or user base yet. How do I get people to turn up to my webinars?
Okay, now this answer, you could swap out webinars for read my LinkedIn posts or visit my website or go to my blog or come to my breakout session at a conference or whatever. And whenever I'm bringing on a new client, this is one of the first things we talk about. And that is that every business has assets, intellectual property, or their team, or they buy things, like they have assets. What most of them have never thought about is that an audience, a durable audience, is also a business asset, and it's something that you need to start developing now, because you'll never regret having an audience that you can talk to when you need to, ever. So it's, and not only that, but depending on who you are, if you're like very small, or you might end up like, being acquired or whatever, like even if you wanted to get a book published today, like you basically have to show up with your readership with you, right? And then the publisher takes you on. So the number one rule is to start building an audience right now. However it is that you build that audience, you do lead magnets, you do advertising, you get yourself, you choose one or two people in the company that are going to be the face of the company, and go out and do public speaking and appear on podcasts and that kind of stuff. So you think of an audience as a business asset that you would develop and invest in and grow like many other kinds of assets. And then the next step is the single fastest shortcut to building an audience, or at least to get someone to show up to your webinar, is that don't make the prime mistake everyone makes, which is like, here's basically in a question like this, what I hope is not happening, but what someone might be meaning is, I have something to say. How can I get people to listen to me? And this is the wrong approach, right? Because very few of us have a lot of attention when it comes to having a stranger talk about themselves, and we have to sit still and listen. Like, it's not a big thing. And so you talk about them, and then somewhere along the line in your presentation or whatever, you put yourself in their story. And so it's also one of the reasons we use that structure, is it forces the person who's creating the content to think about it from the audience's point of view and not from their point of view. It's not about what you want to say. How can I get people to listen to me or show up? It's what would they be interested in watching or listening to? I'm going to make content around that, and I'm going to somehow weave myself into that story. It can seem, it sounds obvious when someone like me says it, but it's apparently not obvious and is somewhat counterintuitive, because every single client that I show up to, they have never done that.
No, so this is great advice, Dean. And even though it seems obvious, I know that personally I've ran into this fallacy. We actually, I think even ran into this at Contrast. You spend so much time like thinking about what you're building and working on your product that you want to go out and tell people about it, and like, you're excited to share it. But when we really started to have results with, the content we were talking about, it's when we took the time to take a step back, think about, okay, what is the user problem? What is the challenges that they're actually facing? And then you start to address those. People will listen in a lot more and for a lot longer if you're talking, to their needs.
All right, what do we got next?
All right, let's go back to the chat. Okay, so question for the speakers. Is it okay to open the webinar room 2 minutes early, or just talk to the audience? Or would it waste the first 5 minutes of attention?
Okay, so just like don't hurt me and courtesy attention and the scary question and the Q&A pivot and all of these other concepts that Best Damn Webinar Company has like had to come up with in the last few years to explain what's happening with the audience. This exists too. This is called the pre-audience. So the pre-audience, there are some people who show up early for basically everything. They show up early for company conference calls. They show up early for webinars. They show up early for live streams, whatever, right? There are two main reasons that they show up early. Some of them show up early because they're so gosh darn fascinated and interested and intrigued by what you're going to say that they couldn't bear the thought that they might be late, or you only have 100 slots open and they might not get in or whatever, right? It's not very likely in a B2B corporate scenario, but there are some people who feel that way. But the majority of them are just people who like to get the details out of the way. We talked about in an earlier session about the title slide, and the title slide's job is not to show people, the title. The title slide's job is to give them that tiny bit of relief. You're in the right place at the right time. Similar with that with the pre-audience, a lot of people don't, in fact, hardly anybody knows what to do with the pre-audience. And so they either ignore them, and it's completely silent, and you're just sort of hanging out there as part of the pre-audience. You've done all your connection stuff. You know the session's going to start. You're not even looking at the page anymore. You're checking your mail. You're doing your actual work, right? Whatever. You just wanted to get the connection stuff done. And some people just ignore them, don't make a sound. And some people actually do some stupid, quote unquote, engagement stuff. Like, hey, why don't you everyone post in the chat and tell us where you are today, or tell us where you're from? There's no reason for this. They think that this like helps with the audience feeling connected to you. It's kind of a waste of time. There are definitely things you can do with the pre-audience. If you're in a presentation style or traditional style webinar where there's going to be one main speaker, then and a host, for instance, or even just like one person total, you can tell a failure story. Now, which is to say, years and years ago, back when we were starting the company, or right when we got out of college, me and Josh, before we started the firm, or whoever Josh is, right? Or something like that. It needs to be a failure with a lesson learned story. And it has to be well into the past, because you can't tell a recent failure story, or it'll make the audience feel like I'm not sure I should be listening to this person. Like they failed Tuesday, and now they're going to tell me something. So it needs to be something that happened a while back and the lesson you learned from it. And that's to build engagement with the audience, like affinity. I don't care about engagement with the pre-audience, but I care about affinity. They should feel like we're in the group together, right? We're in this together. And so you're building affinity to the pre-audience. So you tell them a story about a failure and a lesson learned from years ago, so that it humanizes you or humanizes the company, but doesn't color their perception that you don't have your act together today. The other option in an interview style, if it's not a traditional presentation, but an interview style, is that you tell a similar kind of story, but it's a two-way conversation that the pre-audience gets to pretend that they're eavesdropping on. But it serves the same purpose. The trick to the story, though, two tricks to the story. When I show up to a client where they've been applying the pre-audience story and they're trying to do it, but it's not working for them, because the whole purpose of the affinity and the pre-audience story is that it's measurably effective for raising the response to the call to action at the very end of the whole session. So it works. I mean, it doesn't like double it or triple it, but we see like consistent 5 to 11% upticks in the response to the call to action among the people who showed up early if they got a pre-audience story. But people screw up. They either do they flip it from a failure with lessons learned story to a success story. And it turns off the audience, because no one wants to hear you talk about how freaking great you are, right? But B, because if you're following our structure, and we're called in because people are usually following our structure, is that the gap opens by breaking the audience's reality and showing them the negative present, right? You can't show how you're successful and then like show them that they're sucking. It makes the feeling that they're sucking even worse in them than if you had done nothing at all. So it can't be it can't be success. It needs to be failure. I failed and then I learned. You're failing in some way, or your reality is broken right now. That's what the gap says, right? That's the very first opening you have. And really the whole webinar you're going to give them is there's a failure, there's a negative present. We've got lessons learned and a solution, and we're going to take you to the success. So that's like the arc of the webinar. And so you don't start off by making them feel bad about it, because that's just dumb.
Yeah, got it. So you're like, we already found some positive future. We're going to take you on that same journey. Like build more
you
credibility.
don't show off and tell them that you're now. Here's the trick to that. That's for B2B audiences. If you're talking to a B2C audience, it's perfectly okay and actually better if you show off a success story, because you want to intensify their negative feeling during the opening, during the gap. That makes them want what you have even more. But people think differently when they're thinking about themselves getting something as opposed to their company getting something.
Right. Yeah. Different set of criteria.
It's inverted for B2C and B2B.
Okay. Let's go to the next question here. Okay. So question from LinkedIn Live, actually, where we also have the session going. So the question is, you mean we shouldn't start webinars with 15 minutes of introducing the speakers and the company history? And this person is laughing a bit in their question. I think we covered this theme, but maybe we can go back through it.
So here's something that most people don't ever think about, especially when it comes to B2B kind of webinars, right? Is that there are you either have 2 unknowns or 3 unknowns, but you never have like 3 knowns. For the most part, the audience does not know the host. The audience doesn't know the speaker. They may or may not know the company even, or very much about it, or they don't have any feelings or good feelings about the company. They probably are only have any kind of affinity to the topic. And so you've got a stranger either talking to in an interview style or introducing in a traditional style. You got a stranger introducing another stranger from a company probably don't even know much about or care about a topic that the audience is interested in. So what you open with that gap, like we talked about in the 7-question structure, right? You open with a gap to show their negative present, and then you introduce yourself, because the whole point is you want to show that you understand at least part of their reality better than they do, and you're not putting the focus on whether or not they're interested in you or know you. I mean, there are some instances where the audience knows the company really well, or they feel that they have an affinity to the company's brand or something, and that's a little bit different. But mostly it's 2 strangers talking about a topic, and the topic's the only thing the audience has any affinity to. So yeah, first you show that you can we talked about before at the jump, it's about the audience feeling that you understand them, and then they take the time to understand you. You can't start off with like, hey, here's you. Let's give you the greatest possible opportunity to understand me. It's like, no one cares about you. They definitely don't care about you as much as they care about themselves. So yeah, you start with the gap, and the whole basically first several minutes is about you showing them that you understand them. And once I feel you understand me, if I'm in the audience, then I'll listen and try to understand you. It doesn't work the other way around.
Yep. So almost the same answer as before, but slightly different. Still a good question, because like you said, it seems obvious, but it feels like a lot of people make mistakes here.
Any question with an emoji is by definition a good question. I mean, that's a default right there.
This is true. Okay, so let's keep going. Next question here. My boss thinks webinars are just content. So
right.
Again, not necessarily a question, Dean, but how we're going to answer this one.
Right. So if your boss is in marketing, to some degree, they are content. I mean, talk to anybody, any head of sales at any company, talk to 100 of them and ask them, hey, so does marketing understand how to find or create prospects for you? And for the most part, they'll say no. Marketing knows how to find or create leads, but they don't understand how to create a prospect. And a lead and a prospect are very different, right? And so if your boss is head of marketing, then yeah, for the most part, they don't know how to create prospects, and so webinars are content. The trick there is to slice it up and reuse it in as many different ways as you can to get maximum mileage out of it as content. If your boss is in sales and they're looking at what marketing is doing, and so this just creates leads. This is like a list of people who registered for something. We can't possibly follow up with all these people anyway. And most of them, like, they're not decision makers. Like, you're not wrong, but it's because the webinar isn't structured in a way to move people through an arc and get them to respond to the call to action. And in that case, like, a new structure is needed, a new approach is needed. It can't be the same old, because that's not producing prospects, it's producing leads. There's nothing wrong with producing leads if that's your goal, but if you're in sales, you wish marketing would produce prospects instead of leads.
Right. Yeah, you need to spend the time to actually keep their attention, which you're great at, Dean, and make sure that they're engaged so that you learn enough about them so that you can actually follow up.
I promise you, your sales department would rather have 100 prospects handed over to them than 1,000 leads. No question.
Yep, definitely. Okay, let's see if we have another question here. So why do people not act on my CTA at the end of my webinar? I have 45% live attendance rates. What am I doing wrong here?
Okay, 45% live attendance rates is actually pretty normal. You'd expect about half, in my experience, about half of the people who register should show up, and about half will either watch the replay or they just thought the topic was interesting and they'll never engage with it again. And so it goes back to, what are the reasons people don't respond to or act on the call to action? So, and we've talked about this in a couple of different places before. Either the call to action is so vague that it's not clear what they should do, or there are too many calls to action, or you have, in other words, you have more than one, or you have you have more than one because you have to. Your boss is forcing you to have like more than one, but you haven't mixed up you haven't created a mixture of hard and soft call to actions. You've only done all hard or all soft. And so, like we talked about before, soft would be click here. We're going to be putting out more information about this topic. So click here to subscribe to the newsletter. And, and basically you're putting them into a nurturing campaign. And a hard would be, you can click here to get a demo, see a demo, book a discovery call with sales, something like that. Generally speaking, if people aren't responding to the call to action and it's very, very low, I mean, granted, you could have 100% live attendance. It doesn't mean you're going to get, a really high response rate to your call to action anyway. But when you do get solid response rates, it's because you started way back and you started calling forward to the call to action, right? There, somewhere in the earlier session, you said, early part of the session, you said, no, we've got something coming up, towards the end. I'll give you the link for that in case you're interested. It was almost like a handoff or a throwaway or an aside, but you're sort of building up to it. Let's just assume none of the other sins were committed, right? There is a soft or hard call to action there instead of a vague one. If you have more than one, you're mixing up the varieties, so they look very different. We talked before about how you can eat an entire holiday meal, and then someone says, hey, by the way, we've got ice cream and pie. I said, I could eat, right? And you're already stuffed, but for some reason in your brain, because it's different than the entree, you seem to have room for that in your stomach, right? This is how it works. Human beings like variety and novelty. But the main reason you're not getting a good response rate to the call to actions, either A, you haven't set it up earlier in the session. It feels like it's bolted on. It's a pitch, right? Or else you're doing the call to action wrong, period. Hearts, full stop, right? It's vague. There's too many of them. You're not mixing up the variety of hard and soft. And, it just feels like it's like stuck on at the end of a otherwise interesting topic.
Awesome. Okay, great answer. So we have one more question here from LinkedIn Live.
Okay.
Dean, do you have any mindset advice for low turnout when you're just starting to build out your audience? It's an ego blow. How do I shift that mindset to keep doing more webinars?
So for most really of the early ones that I did, sometimes there was one person in the audience for those live streams. We used to do a lot of them, mostly on LinkedIn Live. And it never bothered me at all. The content lives forever. So if you're repackaging it and slicing it up, you've created the content that you probably wouldn't have created or gotten around to anyway. B, I'm always thankful that those people showed up. So I'm getting a wider audience overall because I'm repackaging the content and I'm chopping it up and I'm like posting it as a blog post and it's being indexed on Google as transcripts and all that kind of stuff. So I know that over time you'll cumulatively grow that, right? I mean, these days when I do just a webinar for my own company or my own causes without doing it on behalf of a client, I routinely get like 150 registrants and about half of those people will show up, right? And so like at one point I had a conversation with a client and they were saying they kept going against the advice that I was giving them on the outbound emails and choosing the topics and following the structure and all this stuff. And so like people, it's like people don't really show up. We might get 25 people to, show up. We might get 30 people to register and only 10 are showing up. And I said, well, think they were gigantic, right? They were like a multi-billion dollar a year company. And I said, I once a month routinely have 150 people register instead of 25. And I have 60 to 80 show up instead of 10 or 12. I said, I don't have a brand name. I haven't been around for decades. I don't have a marketing budget. And yet I can do it. So it's not that we don't know what to do. It's that you don't want to, A, talk about things that the audience cares about instead of what you want to tell them. And B, you're not following a structure for the people who do show up so that they're interested all the way through and there's twists and turns and there's pivots and you're sort of anticipating their fears and questions that they might have and objections and dealing with them in your content. And so, I mean, if you're just starting out and not a lot of people show up, the very first fix is to start doing topics that the audience might be interested in instead of trying to get them to sit still while you talk about yourself. But over time, the structure will keep them there, and more people will show up, and more people will show up, and more people will show up. And these days, while I might get like 150 or so people to register for an event, then once the video's on YouTube, like I'll just sit back, and over the course of a year, it'll rack up at least hundreds more views. Right. So over time, you're cumulatively building that asset, which is your audience.
Yeah,
but
so
just talk about what the audience wants to talk about. That's the easiest way to get people to register.
Yeah, so change the structure, and then, like you said, the only way to get better is to practice. The content is still usable, so there's still a bunch of value.
Yeah, but it's very weird experience to look at a camera when you're talking, but instead of and not see an audience. It's a very weird modern phenomenon, right? I mean, not until TV came along, nobody ever gave a performance where they couldn't see the audience or hear the audience. And so, I mean, a lot of early TV shows, they had live audiences in a little studio because that's what people needed, performers needed to sort of, now we do it routinely. We never see or hear from the audience, but it takes some practice, but you'll get comfortable on camera.
Yeah, it does get better. But with that, Dean, we are out of time. So we're going to have to wrap up here. And that ends our 4-part series on webinars. It's been amazing, Dean. I've learned so much. We're already putting it to use. Before we leave, maybe tell people where they can find more about you and more about what you do.
Oh, yeah, we haven't done this before. So you should definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I might be the only Dean Waye on LinkedIn. The Best Damn Webinar company, bestdamnwebinar.com is the website, and there's usually a contact form there. And there's I don't even know if you can find it even if you search, but there is, if anyone contacts me on LinkedIn or sends an email to Dean at bestdamnwebinar.com, there's a new Udemy course that just went up this week. It is free. And talks about how to own the first 5 minutes, like exactly how to do the pre-audience, the gap, the introduction of yourself, and then painting the positive future, like the first several minutes of every webinar to sort of get and keep that audience's attention so you have some breathing room as you start going into your detail. So that went up on Wednesday. Wait, today is Wednesday. It went up yesterday. And so it's now, and it's free, and it's pretty short. It only takes about 30 minutes, I think, to do the entire course.
Awesome.
Typical for Dean, it takes 32 minutes to describe the first 5 minutes of a webinar. But
Well, and if you want to learn everything we've talked about in this series, again, the replays are available, so you can go back and watch them, listen to Dean go through everything, go back through the questions, and get a chance to experience contrast. So it's been a pleasure, Dean. Thanks again.
Yeah, me too. I really like the platform. I love the pop-ups and the swipes and everything. It's like I said in the very first one, like I was telling my colleagues at Best Damn Webinar, like this is the platform I would have designed if I was in the webinar designing business, when we were starting out.
Well, we appreciate that. And there's even